Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today's guest is Senior Consul Mr. Ariyoshi, who is with the Consul General's Office of Japan in Seattle. We're very happy to have him on the program. He has been in North Idaho today discussing particularly economic and political affairs, and he is in charge for the Japanese government in Seattle, both political and economic issues. We're very happy to have you on our program, Mr. Ariyoshi.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this college. And several times I passed through this Kuda land, and however I didn't have a chance to visit this college until now. So that was very impressive for me to speak at your class, and maybe I think it might be a little bit helpful for the student.
We're delighted to have you here, and we look forward to the questions from our panel today.
Yes.
And I'm happy to welcome to the panel, to my far left is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in Idaho and is a regular member of the panel, and also regular panelist Steve Schink, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and I'll ask Steve Schink to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. Mr. Ariyoshi, we're going to get into a number of topics later, but it might be helpful to begin with a little background about you. Where were you educated? How did you come to be involved in foreign service work? And what have been some of your previous postings?
Because the certainly shows I was born in Japan, and I graduated from one of the national university. And since high schools, I become so interested in history in Middle East, and I thought I better choose the Middle East as my lifetime work. And since I came to foreign services, I was posted in Iran for 7 years, and the second overseas posting is in Australia for 3 years, and this time I'm in Seattle. It makes me for 2 years next February. And
tell us, if you would, what a typical working week is like for someone like you.
I think even the most difficult thing is for us to make the American people understand what we are doing in office. The frustrating things, they don't understand what is a consul. Always they misunderstand the consul as a counselor, but we are not going counseling anything, And so if we are working in an embassy, they understand we are first secretary or counselor, but the consul is not so familiar with this community. And what we are doing is so mainly we take care of the Japanese national in those states, and our second thing is to promote our trade and economic relation with the state of Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And maybe third, the things to bring the many artistic or cultural events from Japan to disseminate our cultural tradition into the American society.
How many Japanese nationals are there living in those 3 states or portions of those 3 states that you're responsible for?
The most populous, Japanese American the state is a state of Washington. There is about 25,000 Japanese American living in around Seattle. But if you are talking about the Japanese nationals who is come here to work in a Japanese subsidiary, there's about 2,000 in Seattle, and we can find very few Japanese who is living in Idaho and Montana.
Janelle Burke.
Well, let's move over into the area of economics some. Can you tell us something about the trade that goes on between your country and our country, particularly on the West Coast? What are the products that are most often traded from Japan to the United States, and then what kinds of things does the United States export to Japan?
I think what we are exporting to the West Coast and Western states is the, as you can observe, the the car and the VCR and the audio-visual things and some sort of the radio cassette, mostly manufactured products and the motorbike. And what the Western states are exporting to Japan is mainly agriculture products such as the orange and what can I say, the wheat and barley and the other thing, different type of agriculture products.
In terms of the whole scope of things, where does the United States stand as one of the purchasers of Japanese products?
I think what we see, the quality is good enough to for American to buy it, and I think, but sometimes now the yen is rising so high, and we are going to lose our competitiveness in the market of the United States, and we are not sure that we can keep up those shares in our years to come, and we must try hard to find a way to how should we keep up our share in this country.
Is the United States one of your major purchasers in the world market? Is the United States one of the major purchasers of Japanese products in the world market, or are there other countries that purchase more of your products?
Oh, I think the Japan is the biggest the exporter of the product to the United States, and Japan is the second largest importer of the U.S. product, including agriculture products. So what I said in our last class, so Japan is the trade volume combined United States and Japan is almost 1/3 of the world trade volume. So that's the magnitude or significance you must think about that.
Mr. Ariyoshi, when you were addressing some of our students earlier today, you had some just most impressive statistics speaking of economic issues. My first question deals with open or free trade contrasted with tariffs, and I don't think Americans are aware that since 1985 that you have had over 2,000 products, I believe mostly industrial products, that you have changed the tariff on. Would you explain that to our viewers, please?
Because what we are blamed or complained by the other nation that our trade tariff is so high, which makes impossible for foreign product to come into our market. So we end up with the lowering and the giving up 2,000 sort of the items of industrial products. So I think this is a significant step to make the foreign products easier to come to our market. But so this is a initial step, and the next step must be leave for the foreign company how to penetrate our market. So government can do more than that is a kind of should say the limit what the government can do for the more trade with foreign countries.
I also don't think that many people are aware of the fact that the United States and Japan are the first and second economic powers really in the world, that between the two countries it produces over 1/3 of the total output. So it's very vital to both countries how we interrelate to one another, since we have such a huge part of the world's economic output. Is that not correct?
Oh, I think maybe I know we make Japan and the United States make almost 1/3 of the world trade, and the we're gonna make almost 1/5 of the world total GNP. So that's how I said, because that's such a huge magnitude, and the what I say, the economies, both countries become intertwined and interdependent. So so we have to realize those facts, and we have to look into the future. How can we cooperate each other for the further prosperity or economic development?
I have one final question before moving back to the panel. One of your colleagues was on this program a year ago, and we very much enjoyed that interview, and he indicated that the United States had such a, at one point, domination of the world trade market, and that out of that we became somewhat complacent, and we thought whatever we produced would sell. Now that other countries, such as your own, have become excellent in world trade, that we might have to take another look at how we study the world market. Would you comment on your colleague's statement that maybe we could get more of the market if we were more?
I really don't know what my colleague said. My consul general, he was here last year, and he might have talked about how to export your product in
Yes, that's
Japan.
what he was dealing with.
And what we are warning to the American businessmen, you shouldn't be complacent with your domestic market. So with a domestic market in the United States, anyhow, there are certain limits. So if you want to expand your business, so you have to find or look into the overseas market. At that time, you have to investigate or be explore their business culture or something like. Otherwise, you're going to be successful in exporting your product. That is, I think, what he intend to say or not. Yeah.
Steve Sheen.
Mr. Ariyoshi, you're aware, I'm sure, that there is some sensitivity in this country about the imbalance of trade between Japan and the United States. You already mentioned one of the areas that concerns Americans, and those are governmental barriers to U.S. products entering Japan. But I'm sure that there are other problems that U.S. business people face when they try to market in Japan. What are some of those problems in your opinion?
Because I don't want to say the American business wasn't successful in Japan, but more than 500 American business become so lucrative in our business society. And the only thing, it takes a long time to be successful in Japan. So maybe what the American business think, when you come to Japan and to start a business, they believe, they're going to make a profit, within 2 or 3 years. But this is going to happen in Japan, because at least you have to, it might take for 7 or 8 years to become profitable, and don't make such a quick decision. You can't make any profit within 2 or 3 years. It is a long time. You need a long time perspective in finding a stable market in my country. So,
hey, you've touched on something there that I think is important. Are there some basic philosophical differences between the way business is done in Japan and the way business is done in the United States?
I think the countries, there's a different, certainly the business cultures practice different, and I want to say maybe this United States business practice almost seem to be a contractual society. When you make a contract, you have to fulfill that obligation. and to no matter what happened for the partner or business partner, they are obligated to fulfill their sort of the obligation. So, but in our country, rather than establishing sort of the business relationship, and in addition, the business relationship is a personal relationship become more important, because since they established the business relationship for several years, more than 10 years, and they don't exchange any contract, and they trust each other, and maybe this friendship or trust, this trust might be inherited to the next generation. And I don't think this is very modern, but this is a fact we have in our business community, and so that's, I think, the difference. And sometimes the American businessmen must understand those differences, and to go and try to establish the business relation with one of the Japanese companies.
With apologies to Janelle Burke, who is an attorney, we have become a very litigious society, which is to say that lawsuits and legal action are a big part of the way we do business. I've been told that is not a thing that Japanese business people are comfortable with. And I think you just touched on that a minute ago, that in some cases where major U.S. businesses involve attorneys in the negotiation stage of contracts, that's not greeted as a positive sign by Japanese. Is that true?
Yeah, I think our people doesn't resort to settle everything by the judicial process, rather than settle the dispute by mutual negotiation. I mean, a mutual negotiation doesn't mean to ask a lawyer to help or settle the things, but still our society is not the country they are good place for the lawyers.
Janelle Burke.
Well, let's go a little bit further along that line of exploring how people do produce in your country. Do people work for a company for a long term? I take it that most of your economy is basically an industrial economy at this point in time. And so do people find a job with a particular company and stay with that company a number of years, or do they move around from place to place?
Yes, I'm sorry. Because our society is still, lifelong employment. Because most of the employees come to the business society just after they graduate colleges or high school, and there's a very few cases they're gonna leave the one company and to move into another company. And I don't know why this is a kind of social value, and people is moving from one company to another for every 2 or 3 years. So most of the people, majority think he's not a good businessman, and but this is United States opposite. The people moving from one company to another for several years, he might be very competent or very excellent business person. But Japan, we don't see those people as a competent. They are good businessmen.
Is there opportunity then for promotion within that company? And why do people stay with the company for such a long time? Why do they want to stay with that particular company as opposed to moving to another one?
This is kind of the social benefit or some kind of fringe benefit that has been offered by the company to the employees, because we see the company is not the only company where we work, and we're gonna find a good friend in a company, and maybe if he's a bachelor, companies, senior person might find there some future bride for themselves, and I think company is maybe one of the community, and we don't see the company just where we work, and
What about the role of management? You just touched on it. The manager might be very solicitous with his employees. What about the role of higher management as opposed to lower management? Does higher management feel a great responsibility to their employees?
Yes, I said in a classroom to our society basically is not, you know, bottom-down society. Rather, you know, I'm sorry, our society is not a top-down society like United States, but rather, you know, bottom-up society. And I think the most powerful and responsible management is in a middle-class management. It's not the top executive. So if the top executive, you know, directs something, but you know, middle-class management it doesn't agree, things doesn't get through. And the middle management, you know, the core of the company is to make the company, you know, make more, you know, workable and to make profitable, and that's, I think, is, you know, the Japanese typical companies, the business, excuse me, the management structure, I think.
It is my understanding that your companies have been very successful in modernizing, in bringing up to date their performances as well as their plants. Would you agree with that statement? And what kinds of things are being done by the companies to keep abreast of the most recent developments in world technology?
I know Japan is always number 2, you know, second to the United States. What United States fail in a different occasion. So we learned the lesson from the United States, fail in a different occasion. So we were successful. We are not, you know, we don't fail in certain, you know, cases. So we are lucky. We always, you know, looking over the United States, what the United States doing to responding to the every economic situation. So we are not going to repeat that, you know, failure already. So why we are successful? That is my impression. Because you know, we can be a #1 country, because we don't know how to initiate to, you know, the counteract or respond to the situation. So United States had experience, and maybe, you know, if we become a #1 economic power, United States might get some lesson from my country, so become more competitive and become more powerful, and that's why we are successful last, you know, 40 years. That's my belief or my impression. Yeah.
I'd like to shift the subject to political issues. And
yes.
In earlier discussion that you indicated, of course, that the Constitution that you've had in the government for 40 years is one that democracy is flourishing, and you have within your Constitution fundamental human rights and civil rights. I would like to do a comparison. In our country, under free speech and free press, we debate quite often what we should say or what we should print, and the U.S. Supreme Court has indicated that there's a great latitude, but there are some things that cannot be said that are libelous or slanderous and so forth. How do you deal with this in your country through your governmental institutions? Are there areas of restrictions on speech and press, or is there very extensive freedom of what can be printed and said?
Because you know, this kind of conception has been adopted, you know, almost 100 years ago. At the time, Japan opened up the door to the foreign countries. Until then, we didn't have such, you know, conception, and so our people is still immature to think about, you know, human rights however, we had a very, you know, democratic constitution at the 1947, and this constitution is, you know, protect almost all the basic human rights. But however, you know, a little bit hard to say, is there any violation to these, you know, human rights? Because there's many argument from the other side of people. The government is not, they are not so careful about they don't pay any attention to the basic human rights. But as a public servant, this is a little bit awkward to say our government doesn't look after the human rights very well. But I think it might take 2 or 3 decades to make the people more mature to become conscious about what is human rights. But I think so far our Constitution protects the basic fundamental human rights, and that is much better than before the Second World War, which had the major constitution.
Within your political parties and also the dissenting that takes place, certainly there's many opportunities in which individuals and groups do speak out under freedom of speech in opposition to policies. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, does the government ever from time to time intervene to attempt to...
No, this not happen ever, because this is we see their fundamental human rights to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. So government rather try to protect those rights, and we are not going to interfere to the people and to not to speak in a certain issue.
Thank you. Steve Sheen.
I'm going to ask you to step outside of what may be the areas you traditionally speak on, but we've talked about some of the things that U.S. people and U.S. government are sensitive to with regard to their relations with Japan. One issue is defense. At the end of the Second World War, the United States was virtually the only country among Western nations capable of providing a defense network for its allies. That's changed a lot, and the United States is still paying a huge amount of money annually for defense. Japanese pay relatively much, much less, and there's pressure from our government on the Japanese to increase their share of the defense burden. Is there any movement there?
We have dilemmas in sort of the two sides of coins. Maybe we understand or we become conscious about the sort of the burden sharing in our defense, responsible of defense expenditure, and it might be possible to increase our defense expenditure from the current level to the little bit up. But the concern is maybe it's some sort of the anxiety or is coming be arising in the United States, because now we are spending almost $62 billion for defense budget.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're out of time. I wish we could continue, Mr. Ariyoshi, but it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been the Senior Consul of the Consul General's Office in Seattle for Japan. We've immensely enjoyed this interview, and I thank the panel for their fine questions. I'd invite you to do this again next week at the same time. Until then, have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.